Guys, big news.
What's your big news, dude?
What's your big news?
I got big news. I got big news.
What's your big news,
Randy
dude?
Bryce sent me an email. Randy Bryce at Iron Stash on the tweets sent me an email. In the email, he showed me the ads he's planning to show during the CNN Paul Ryan. Can you call it a town hall? Is it like actually appropriate to call it a town hall?
When is this town hall? This alleged town hall. This so-called town hall.
I'm going to forward you guys this email. Check your Gmails.
No, don't forward it to me.
No, I'm going to forward it to you.
Don't do it.
I'm forwarding it to Tom's email address, and I'm going to forward this to Ruchit's email address.
Why are you forwarding these to us?
Oh, shiz. He's all like, oh, I'm an iron worker. I'm a union guy. I'm like much more liberal than Paul Ryan. This is dope, dude.
Do you guys follow at Iron Stash?
I'm not
of course.
On the
I'm not on
Twitters?
Twitter. I mean, I have a Twitter account, but I don't really use Twitter.
Of course we follow at Iron Stash, Tom.
I don't, to be clear.
You don't follow at Iron Stash?
I mean, I haven't logged onto Twitter in many months.
Maybe you should consider it, Ruch.
Ruch, you should really think about watching these Iron Stash videos.
So that I'm willing to do. I mean, a good political ad, I'm certainly willing to watch.
No, come on, watch the FaceTime one.
Who's he FaceTiming?
Paul Ryan.
He managed to get Paul Ryan on FaceTime? How does one do that?
Whoa, he says Donald Trump is clearly a racist.
It's funny because it's true.
Iron Stash says that Donald Trump is clearly a racist.
Hard to disagree with that one. Hey, maybe we can call this episode Everything We Know About Things That Are Hard to Disagree With.
Everything no one disagrees with but Donald Trump.
I mean, we probably shouldn't because that's not going to get any hits. You know what I mean? Whereas everything we know about neo-Nazis or everything we know about white supremacists, that's going to get some hits, I feel like. I feel like our chances of actually having people listen to us go up if that's our discussion.
Or read the show notes.
Yeah.
No, don't check the show notes. Don't check the show notes yet because there's not a lot in them right now.
Definitely check.
There might be more in the show notes later, like when you're actually listening.
Definitely check the show notes.
No, check the show notes.
Tom's gonna have some good stuff for the show notes. I'm confident. I
Don't
believe
check the
in
show
Tom.
notes.
So guys, I mean, okay, so maybe we should talk about white supremacists. And I think basically, even if you were living under a rock, there's a decent chance that you heard about what happened this past. Has it been a week yet?
Yeah, I think so.
It's been a week. So
It happened over the weekend.
Yeah. So today is the 21st. So that was
like Friday and Saturday.
Yeah, it was Friday and Saturday. So today's the 21st. That was the 19th. Or Saturday was the 19th.
The
11th.
It's only been a few days.
So on the 11th, white supremacists held a rally, a violent rally in Charlottesville, Virginia. And there were counter-protesters there. There were people that were saying, hey, white supremacists, neo-Nazis, it's not okay.
I think it was the Virginia students, UVA students, that were protesting.
That was the first night. I think the second day, which was Saturday, the 12th, I think it was a much bigger counter-protest. It wasn't just the students.
So before we launch too deeply into this, I would recommend, if you haven't already, to watch the Vice documentary, and we'll put this in the show notes. It is an incredible portrait.
I haven't seen it either, and I also am.
No, it's gonna make me too sad.
I don't know if scared is the right word, but I think watching it will give me extreme anxiety. But maybe that's what I need.
Yeah, I think this is the type of situation where you need to put a little anxiety on yourself, because that is the stakes that we are dealing with.
Hold on, I'm Jewish. I already know the stakes. No one needs to tell me the stakes because I'm Jewish.
Well, Tom and I are not white, which may come as a surprise to everyone listening to the show, but it's actually true. Wait, should we admit this, Tom?
No, so we did a whole episode about it. No, I'm not saying that like Jewish people understand suffering better than anyone else or anything else, but Jewish people understand Nazis. Like, no one needs to explain Nazism to me. Like, so
yeah,
you guys didn't.
So it's not an explainer of Nazism, though. It's an explainer of what happened in Charlottesville.
Yeah, no, Nazis.
You know?
Nazis happened in Charlottesville.
And I mean.
No, so like, like part
it's
part of the like Jewish experience in like grade school is either like going to a parochial school or Sunday school or whatever, is that they have this like roster of Holocaust survivors to like bring out to classes to show you their tattoos and stuff, right? Like there's this whole like industry of bringing out Holocaust survivors to tell their stories to grade schools. But my point is that like I don't need to watch the Vice documentary. Like nobody like it's fine. I'm Jewish. I've seen like I know a lot about Nazism. Like I don't need to see another Nazis video. Like I understand that these aren't like the Nazis. These are just like some Nazis, but I don't need to see any more Nazis. Like I'm good.
Okay, Richard, you should watch the Vice documentary.
I will. And I think what I was trying to say is that Tom and I are not white, and a lot of the things that the protesters were chanting and saying, and it was broadly directed also at people that are not white broadly. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't think they were singling.
No, they were
Jews,
sometimes.
In this instance, I mean, yeah, sometimes they were.
Yeah,
but I think they have hate in their heart for more than just.
I think
Jews.
that's fair to say. Their hearts are hateful enough. I won't say big enough, but I will say their hearts are hateful enough to hate more than just Jews. I think Tom is correct about that.
So I do recommend watching the Vice documentary. If not for AJ, then for Rucha.
I will watch.
I don't want to watch
it.
No,
I'm going to watch it.
Don't make me watch it.
AJ, you don't have to watch
Rich,
it.
Can
but
you watch it?
Yeah, I'll watch it, dude. Don't worry. So I wanted to. So there's a great New York Times article, which I'll put in the show notes. But I thought that this was.
Will you put it in the show notes? Will you even share it with your co-host so we can put it in the show notes?
I'm looking at it on my phone, Tom. So it's one of those things that. Hold on. Let me put it in the Slack. Hold on. But I.
Oh God.
No. Let me just go ahead and let me just put it in there.
Could you put it in the Google Doc?
Yeah, Tom, there's a lot of like synchronization that has to occur, you know what I mean? And cross-platform integrations and stuff like that. So just hold on a second.
You're just making up words.
Okay, now I got it. Now you can see it. We can put it in the show notes.
So tell us about this New York Times article.
Yeah, so the New York Times article is about just some real words from just words from the Charlottesville rally participants. These are things that they actually said either at this rally or at previous neo-Nazi rallies. So one of them, should I name them? What's our philosophy on actually naming these people? The New York Times certainly names them, but do we want to give them by name shout outs? This isn't about like embarrassing them because they've embarrassed themselves, but
I mean, you can say what they say. Yeah, you can just say what they said.
I don't want to have this philosophical debate. I'm going to delete this from the episode. Just say what they said.
Okay. One of them, the main organizer of the Charlottesville rally, said, "Our entire country would be better off if the South had won the Civil War."
Aren't they making an HBO show about that?
I don't know. Here's what another one of them said. And globalism is the enemy of all of us. And the Jewish oligarchs and the capitalists and the bankers want to enslave the entire world. Here's another one. This is from Richard Spencer, who's probably the most prominent leader of the white nationalist movement. America was, until this last generation, a white country designed for ourselves and our posterity. It is our creation. It is our inheritance, and it belongs to us. So these are just some of... Here's another one. There is a war against you, white men and white women, on the streets of our city. America was... Here's another one. America was founded as a white man's land, and our race is our nation.
I mean, to be fair, America was founded as a white man's land. Like, he's not wrong about that one.
So, actually, this brings up an interesting point, right? Which is one of the definitions of propaganda is mixing truth and fiction in the same statement. Another definition of propaganda is stringing together multiple true statements to create a false picture or to help people to a conclusion that is completely false. And this is probably a good example of both of those, which is, yes, America was founded as a white man's nation, and America was founded largely by people that believed the white race was superior. So,
I mean, is that any different than saying that, Republicans are the party of Lincoln and Democrats are the party of Burr?
No, it's not. That's, I guess, my point, right? Is that you string together a bunch of factual statements, which independently are facts, and then you put them together and they create an impression or a conclusion that is actually not supported by those statements.
Oh, like Trump.
Yeah, exactly.
I got one. Like Dinesh D'Souza.
Yeah. I don't know if Dinesh is a white supremacist. I hope he isn't.
He's just really, really conservative,
he's
right?
Real racist.
I can't speak on his racism, but he is really conservative. And he is he is
Who is this guy?
He's a white, he's white. He's not white. He's not white. He's a conservative thinker, and I put that in air quotes. He writes about he just writes about all kinds of conservative topics.
Okay, so shall we go back to white supremacy, Charlottesville, what happened, aftermath, the Donald Trump presser, all of the millions and millions of things that happened.
Okay, so first the Nazis descended on Virginia.
Yep. Then there were counter protesters,
and they said blood and soil, blood and soil.
And what does blood and soil mean?
It's just like an actual Hitler Nazi slogan, like hope and change, like hope we can change for or whatever, but for Nazis.
But Nazis, okay.
Yeah, yeah. So imagine Obama saying hope and change, but instead of Obama saying hope and change, it's someone else saying blood and soil. And also the stakes of that election are we support white racial hegemony.
Doesn't sound good.
Yeah. Okay. So the Nazis defend on Charlottesville, and it's terrible. And
a lady gets killed. Several people get injured.
A woman dies. Her name's Heather Heyer.
No, she gets murdered.
She gets murdered. That's true. Heather Heyer's parents won't speak to Trump, and they're very energized in terms of using Heather Heyer's sacrifice to promote tolerance and opposition to extremism.
That seems reasonable.
Okay, so Donald Trump...
She was a paralegal.
Heather Heyer?
Did you know that?
She was what?
Yeah.
Oh, I did not know that.
In our own very profession.
Wow. Good for her. Okay, so Donald Trump gives a press conference, and at the press conference, he says that some of the Nazis are good people.
There are fine, very fine people on both sides, is what he said. And I'm sorry, if you're a Nazi, I don't consider you a very fine person.
Or if you're just not marching with the Nazis.
I think it doesn't need to be.
If you think it's a good idea to march with Nazis, even if you don't hold Nazi beliefs, probably not a good idea. Not a good person. Just going to put that out there.
Don't march with Nazis.
There are very few litmus tests in the world, and I think we can say at this point in our society, Nazism can be a litmus test.
If you are a Nazi or you believe that certain people are superior because of their race, or you believe that you are entitled, if you are of one race, to kill people who are not of your race, you're a bad person. If you march with people that have those beliefs, you're a bad person. These are absolute rules that I am laying down here, which I think we as a society are willing to accept.
Yeah. So, okay. So let me just give a brief overview of the presser. So Donald Trump goes on this press conference and says a whole bunch of things. It was originally supposed to be about infrastructure, but the vast majority of the questions were, of course, about this huge thing that happened in Charlottesville and instead of staying on script or just avoiding those questions completely or doing the right thing and opposing Nazism, Donald Trump decides to say that, there are good people on both sides, along with a lot of verbiage. Some of the things on the periphery that I found interesting about the press conference were, if you look at the body language of the folks surrounding Donald Trump, the individuals that were in the background that were a part of his administration, they were not happy that he was doing this. And there were reports after the fact that the folks in the administration were surprised that he said this. But what really got me about that was they were saying the administration was surprised that the president would express publicly opinions that he had long expressed in private, which makes you kind of think about what's going on there in the administration.
I always think quotes like that are somewhat self-serving, right?
But is that self-serving though?
Can't you make up a more self-serving thing to say?
It makes you look like an idiot.
Can't you? I mean, does this really go to the incompetence of the Trump administration that even when his aides are leaking things, they can't leak things that reflect on themselves positively? Like, couldn't you say, instead of saying, I can't believe he said these things in public that he's always told me in private, and I've sat around and nodded my head, now I can't believe he did that in public. Couldn't you instead say something like,
Leaking gobbets like that is totally self-serving, right? So first of all, you establish yourself for the reporter as someone who recognizes that these kind of comments are inappropriate, and you build up this relationship with reporters where you're someone you're one of the lone voices of sanity in this bizarre White House, and when the time comes, this reporter will have a relationship with you.
AJ,
no, this explanation, top to bottom, top to bottom, these leaks where it's I've been in the room when Donald Trump was racist, but just so you know, I'm trying to stay on to be one of the lone voices of sanity. It's just like Jared and Ivanka. Jared and Ivanka get these glowing.
Not anymore, dude.
Profiles.
Not anymore.
No, even still. Right?
So do you guys know where Jared and Ivanka were on Tuesday when President Trump was making his when he was embracing Nazis as very fine people? Do you know where they were? They were on vacation.
No, they were in Vermont or something, right?
They were on vacation.
But one of the things you can count on in situations like these is for when some situation like this happens, right? When Donald Trump says that some Nazis are fine people or whatever, you can count on Glenn Thrush or Maggie Haberman, both of the New York Times, to almost immediately tweet out some kind of statement from sources, quote unquote, close to Jared and Ivanka, where they said, oh, Jared and Ivanka support transgender people and are dismayed, or Jared and Ivanka support climate and are dismayed, right? Like top to bottom, there's this series of leaks from people who are trying to give the New York Times the impression that, there are these quiet voices of sanity in a White House in chaos, and that these are the people who these are the people who have a career to watch out to because they hope to have some sort of future in conservative politics. In 8 to 10 years, when the entire GOP is trying desperately to pretend that the Trump presidency never happened, that these are the kind of people that are going to need some favorable coverage in the New York Times. And frankly, they have they have socialized, right? They still try to go to parties in Georgetown, and they need to be able to tell whomever it is that they're talking to that, oh no, you see, Maggie Haberman says that I'm actually one of the reasonable people in the White House, right? It's so transparently self-serving, and the fact that you guys are just laughing it off is to a certain extent kind of weird.
No. So I think it's just hard.
Yeah, we're laughing at them.
Yeah, we're laughing at them for being bad at being self-serving, okay? At least I am. Because if you wanted to be self-serving, you could do a much better job than to say, man, he's such a racist. He's always talking like this. But gosh, I can't believe that, he said it in public. I mean, you could say, I don't know, I can't believe he said this stuff. I don't agree with it, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, that's sort of a moot point.
Yeah. Yeah. So, continuing down the line of crazy things that Donald Trump did following this.
So I think let's walk through. So one thing that he did was he said that there's blame on both sides. and he has no doubt about it.
We got that.
And that there were, but you also had people that were very fine people on both sides. That's another thing that he said. Another thing that he said is, I'm not putting anybody on a moral plane. So he created this. I think what was pretty striking was his refusal to just say, hey, one side is wrong. They're just plain wrong. You know? And that has a lot. I mean, there's been some good articles written about how, you know, Trump sort of finds the ability to not lead whenever there's an opportunity for leadership. You know, like anytime there's a time where he could be a moral leader, he chooses to be like an egomaniac instead.
This is a T-ball set up on a pedestal.
It really is.
Ready for him to knock it out of the park. Like, I mean, this is...
How hard is it? How hard is it to just say neo-Nazis are terrible and there's nothing as bad as a neo-Nazi?
Okay, so given the fact that by the time we release this episode, the entire cycle of like outrage and interest in this topic will have gone, like what is the takeaway? What is something that someone listening to this should think now that they've heard the things that we've said?
So I think let's go further than that, right? Because I think like, yeah, maybe the outrage cycle will be over, maybe it won't. I don't know, you know? But I do think that like...
It just depends on how fast AJ edits this.
Yeah, true. True. But I also think that like, you know, it's good for us to tell our listeners exactly what happened. Because I think that if you don't read the news as much as all of us tend to, or if a lot of your news just comes from what you see in Facebook headlines, I think you can easily just have a 1, 2, or 3 headline knowledge of something like this, the way that I have a 1, 2, or 3 headline knowledge of the solar eclipse, because I haven't like read that much about it. And I think this is just far too important to not tell people the actual facts of what happened. And honestly, we don't need to give them takeaways. They will have their own takeaways as to what it all means when the president of the United States won't unequivocally condemn neo-Nazis, when the president of the United States says that people that are protesting neo-Nazis, and frankly, the left that was protesting, like what were they going to do? What was the worst that the left was going to do? They were going to give all of us clean air? Like, you know, what was going to happen? You know what I mean? Like, this is the ideas that the two sides were protesting for were I mean, anyway.
The alt-left, you mean?
Yeah, right. The alt-left. I still don't know what that means.
Yeah. You know, on that note, Trump has this, I don't know if you'd call it a skill, but he basically just takes some very real thing that happens that hurts legitimate people and then turns it against those legitimate people. You know what I mean? Like, or those legitimate issues. Like what I'm thinking of is like, you know, in the election cycle, like the fake news that really bolstered his campaign, helped him become president. He uses that now to attack, you know, very real news. And, you know, now and another example you have here is the alt-right who are filled with these elements of society that we would prefer not to associate with. He turns that around and tries to equivocate and make
Yeah, no, I was going to say this is a really important thing, I think, to recognize, which is Trump manages to pull morality out of every situation. And that's because in Trump's world, there isn't morality. There isn't right and wrong. There's just power. And there's wealth. Who's powerful, who's wealthy, right? If you look at it, he surrounds himself with people that are wealthy, right? He doesn't really surround himself with poor people, for example, you know? All of his displays publicly are displays of power or displays of wealth, right? They're not arguments for morality or for what is right and what is wrong. And even when he does say things like, this is just wrong, he's inevitably talking about something to do with money, you know? And that is, I think you're right, Tom. I think it is a skill that he has of taking a situation which should make us all think about what is right and what is wrong and turning it into some sort of, well, you know, everybody's evil, so why can't I be evil?
Yeah.
And that's what a lot of what his comments boil down to on Charlottesville, which is that there's lots of evil people in this world. What are you going to do? You know, well, you're president, asshole, so do something. You know? Like like do something. And there's probably 50 different things that you could do to stop. I mean, one thing, could be just to, stop sort of being morally equivocal on neo-Nazis, for example. That would be an easy thing to do.
So why do you think that Donald Trump feels the need to be morally equivocal with respect to neo-Nazis? I mean, do you think he supports Nazism and that's why, or do you think that he refuses to take a moral stand because he just doesn't believe in the concept of principles? Does he find principles to be a weakness? Is it that he has this sort of bellicose relationship with the press, and if he knows that the press are expecting something, he anticipates doing the opposite? I think all of these theories are somewhat valid, right? Like everything beginning from Donald Trump has sympathies with Nazism to, Donald Trump does things reflexively that are the opposite of whatever it is he thinks the press is expecting. I think all of those are valid interpretations. But I mean, which of them do you think is sort of more urgent or more accurate?
I think he's a man without principles.
Yeah, I think your every understanding of Donald Trump has to start with the fact that he does not have a clear belief in right and wrong. He has a clear belief to the extent that, he believes he's right. So that's number one. But he doesn't have any beliefs in any specific morality.
Okay, so quick hypo.
Number
I'm
one.
a person without principles. Why do I care particularly whether some Nazis may or may not be good people?
If some of those Nazis are in your base?
Yeah. If you feel that some...
Like if they're empowering you?
So do you think that Donald Trump has a conscious understanding that his political fortunes, to a certain extent, rise and fall with the opinions of Nazis?
Yes.
Yeah, I think so.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, you think he has that conscious understanding?
Yeah, I think he does.
I
think he gets that.
I mean, I don't think he race baits like he does out of ignorance, or just like he's dumbfoundedly become the hero of the Nazis. I don't think that's I think that's intentional. I think that his racism is very intentional.
Yeah, I think he's saying these things for very specific reasons, So one of the funny things that he said during this press conference was, I like to know the facts before I make a statement. Right? That was probably...
It's funny because it's not true.
Not true, right? I sort of joked on the Slack at one point about how Donald Trump, he'll call all Mexicans rapists and murderers and people that are pushing drugs, and he'll make claims about where Barack Obama was born. But when it comes to Nazis, he's got to make sure he's right,
He's got to wait for the facts to come in.
With Barack Obama's, birth certificate, with, Mexico, with China, with all of these other things, he can say completely false things without getting the facts in. But not on neo-Nazis, man, because, gosh, you want to be careful about that. And on Russia, right? I mean, this is the other kind of, to your point, AJ, there are two things that he cannot seem to sort of be firm against. He can be firm against Rosie O'Donnell. He can be firm against the media. He can attack judges. He can attack the parents of dead soldiers. But he can't seem to attack Nazis or Vladimir Putin. Why is that?
I don't know, dude. I don't know.
Do we want to talk about the Confederate monuments?
Yeah. So what do you guys think? What do you guys think about taking down these monuments?
I have a lot of, I don't know. I'm not conflicted about it because I do think they should be taken down. But I think it's useful to walk through the arguments and why we agree or disagree with them, just for our audience, right? So one of the arguments which Donald Trump made, was, so right now you're going to take down the monument to Robert E. Lee. What's next? He says. Is it Jefferson? Is it Washington? What's next? What do you guys say to that?
Can I say two
Please.
things about that? Okay, so the first thing I would say about that is, Jefferson and Washington weren't traitors to the United States of America.
Yeah.
Right? Like they are not traitors. They are the founding fathers, blah, 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 blah. They're great, whatever. The second thing I would say about that is that it dovetails from the first thing, which is I think that line of argument is a ramification of a education in history that tends to worship the founding fathers without an appreciation or acknowledgement of their flaws.
Yeah, that was the second point I wanted to make. I'm really mad that you made it before I got a chance to.
AJ, you can expound on that point. How about that?
Yeah, go ahead and expound. It's all you, dude. Go. I'm passing the ball to you.
I mean, I just think what a tremendous self-own it is to point out in your argument what all of the problems in America's history, because if they're like, oh, like you find Confederate monuments to be problematic because of slavery, what about all of these other slave owners in our founding history? And then, I mean, the answer is like, yeah. Like, isn't that a problem? Yeah.
Well,
isn't that like a big effing deal?
Yeah. I think one of the conservatives on Twitter pointed out, well, you know, if we're going to take down Robert E. Lee, what about Christopher Columbus? And a lot of people responded by saying, yeah, let's take him down too, you know? I think that the other thing too that I would say about this is not to say that our country is a steaming pile of
it's
dung,
not,
right? Like I think the beauty of our country is that it is.
No, it surely is cooled in 250 years.
Yeah. No, yeah, it's no longer steaming. But no, in seriousness, I think the beauty of our country is that it is the history of this country is about the closing of the gaps between the purported ideals that we put on paper and the institutions that we actually have,
yep.
Right? And I think we can fairly say that there is, you know, since the beginning of the country, there's been a wide gap between those things that we say we want as ideals or we put down in our Constitution or our Declaration of Independence or any of these founding documents as the ideals that give birth to this country, and the practice, the actual institutions that we have in our country. And I think you can see over time, you know, that gap has closed, and we still have a lot of work to do to completely close that gap. But I think that is what we should take heart in, not necessarily any one individual. We shouldn't deify or worship any one individual. You know, we should look at these individuals, you know, as a whole. Like, you know, they did good things, but they also had bad parts to them because they were living in that time. And what are those bad parts? What are the good things that they did?
And I think, you know, to give them a lot of credit, like Washington and Jefferson, right? They at least in their writing, you know, their intent in many ways was to improve on what existed at the time.
That's like as self-serving as the Maggie Haberman leakers.
No, I think it was. I think you read a lot of Jefferson's writing in particular, you know what I mean? And it was. I mean, if Jefferson really believed a lot of these things in the most sort of cold, racist, you know, white supremacist way, you know, why was he keeping a copy of the Quran? You know, I don't see Richard Spencer carrying a Quran around or knowing what the hell's in it, you know?
No, so I actually think Jefferson may be the most problematic figure from like the canonical main handful of founding fathers, because George Washington ultimately did emancipate the bulk of his slaves. But I mean, the Thomas Jefferson Sally Hemings relationship is totally problematic, and you know, he didn't end up emancipating his slaves, and when push came to shove, it just turned out that he was too poor to be able to afford to live without his slaves. And I mean, I think that Jefferson may have the largest mismatch between his rhetoric and his actual conduct of his life. And so I think that sort of Jefferson gets like a pass for having his, like, you know, his red text deist Bible and a few choice words about how slavery will ultimately be the downfall of the Republic, which was sort of, I mean, true on both counts. Like, the deist Bible did turn out to be more popular in the long run, and slavery did tear the nation asunder. So kudos to him for his like foresight, but I don't think that like gives him a pass for the actual like conduct of his affairs.
Well, I'm definitely not saying that, right? I think what I'm saying is those are some differences, right, between Robert E. Lee and between Washington and Jefferson, right? I mean, and So, okay, that was the first argument, right? The first argument was, what about – no. I think this is important because I think we need to discuss like all of these arguments because I'm seeing them all over social media. I'm seeing them in the press, and I think we should discuss the arguments and discuss the merits and demerits of those arguments, right, instead of just giving our listeners the quote-unquote takeaway. Because, I mean, they're listening to us for, 3-4 hours a week for a reason. You know what I mean? So AJ,
Rich, do you think that's how long the episodes are?
They're not. I thought they were 4 hours long.
Do you? We only ever record for about an hour and a half. Where do you think the other? Okay.
I thought you doubled the length just to sort of make it.
Rich doesn't listen to the show, everyone.
I thought you put it at 50% speed because we talk so fast.
If you have ever once checked the show notes, that's like twice as much time as Rich has ever put into the show notes.
Dude, that's cruel. That's cruel.
It's funny because it's true.
Maybe a little true. But okay, so that was the first argument, right? The second argument that's been heard a lot, and Ted Cruz made this argument a couple days ago, I think, was we don't want to sanitize history. We don't want to clean it up, and removing these monuments will somehow sanitize history. What's y'all's view on that?
I think that argument's crap. I think that argument is a last-ditch rhetorical device of someone who is callow and directionless in his morals.
Although not so directionless as to be unable to unequivocally criticize the Nazis.
Oh, I mean, look, so what do we do? What do you do when you have acknowledged that some regime no longer deserves to be venerated, right? You destroy the statues, right? What happened at the end of the Operation Iraqi Freedom? They toppled the statue of Saddam Hussein. What did they do at the end of World War II? They blew up the swastika at the top of that building, right? It's like a famous video of the huge swastika getting blown up with dynamite or whatever, right? Like this is, it's like pretty clear to me that you have these statues. These statues exist as a symbol of white supremacy. And that when you want to communicate to a society, either to a conquered people or just to reflect inwardly on your own values, you make as much of a show of toppling these structures as you did of putting them up. So the history of these structures is that they were erected specifically during Jim Crow to support the efforts of white supremacy. And you make an equally symbolic gesture in taking them down in order to show that you repudiate white supremacy, right? And it's not a whitewashing of history to repudiate, right? Like it's not a whitewashing of history that the Supreme Court doesn't cite Korematsu anymore, right?
Yeah. I also think there's nothing that says you have to remove these people from and what they did from the history books, right? Like I think it would be a whitewashing of history if all of a sudden we just didn't talk about the Civil War in our history
ironically,
classes.
that's actually so one of the things that Dick Cheney proposed years and years ago, and Liz Cheney as well, was reformatting our textbooks to talk less about what we did to the Native Americans. Because it's funny because there was a time when even talking about these issues, at least amongst some conservative Republicans, was considered attacking America. You were attacking America if you talked about what we did to the Native Americans, or if you talked a little too much about slavery, or if you talked a little too much about Jim Crow. That was called attacking America.
There's a great line in 30 Rock where Alec Baldwin says, no, it's not in 30 Rock. It's in Boston Legal. William Shatner says, anytime you're talking about the president, that's Bush bashing. Ugh, edit this out of the show. I hate it.
No, I mean, I remember when he said that. That was great. I was like, oh, he's right. Okay, so that was one of the other arguments, was that you're whitewashing is that you are you're whitewashing history, or you're removing it. One of the other arguments was, and this is the argument I kind of struggle with the most, because it creates the most sensitivity amongst people, which is, well, it's about Southern history,
Yeah, it is about Southern history. It is about a Southern history of white supremacy. And it's not just about Southern history, because they have Confederate monuments in California and Arizona and in Maryland, which was not a Confederate state. Yeah, I mean, they have these...
I didn't know they were in California.
They have a string of Jefferson Davis highways from coast to coast. Basically, they tried to track the Mason-Dixon line to have like a Southern Lincoln Highway. I mean, these are not just symbols of Southern history, right? Like Arizona doesn't have a Southern history, but Arizona has Confederate monuments that need to be taken down. So, I mean, I just think that argument is just ahistorical. It does nothing to explain why, like, Maryland has tons of Confederate statues when Maryland was a Union state.
So why does Maryland have a bunch of...
Why do they?
I read an article and I didn't save it. God damn it.
It's okay. We can edit it out while you look for it.
I don't think we're going to forget. I mean, I think the best argument for me on why these statues need to come down is you don't put statues up in honor of the things you're ashamed of.
Yeah, it's just totally you're honoring something by putting a statue in a public park, at a courthouse, at a public.
And maybe
building.
this has something to do with the moral equivalence of it as well, which is the idea that there were two just sides. You know, is sort of the implicit argument here, isn't it?
Here, I'm copying an article into the Slack. This is in quartz, but this isn't exactly the article I read, but it has the same sort of gist. So basically, these Civil War memorials were like mass produced extremely cheaply, which is why the one in Durham was so easy for protesters to topple. And the Daughters of the Confederacy and other Confederate figures bought these like extraordinarily like cheaply mass produced statues or whatever and distributed them. Basically throughout the country. I mean, into places that
Wow, they were produced in northern foundries. Gosh.
Yeah.
Talk about capitalism.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it is, right? Like, these were people... I mean, a lot of these statues are interchangeable. They're, like, statues in two different states that are exactly identical. Like, same mustache, same posture and everything, except that the one belt buckler says U.S. and the other one says CS.
Yeah, this is a good article for people to look at. Also, there's another... The Southern Poverty Law Center, I guess, has all like they've chronicled all 1,500 statues and symbols of the Confederacy. This is pretty interesting. Public symbols of the Confederacy. This is a really cool. It's linked to in that article.
But so there was a movement of these like mass-produced statues in the beginning of the 20th century to distribute these like throughout the country, right? Like the fact that these like statues represent some sort of like Southern heritage, unless you think that like Arizona at the height of Jim Crow became like extremely concerned about like South Carolina plantation culture or something, is like totally bizarre. Right? It's just not factual. Like that may be what it represents to you, but then you have to be admitting that an essential element of Southern heritage is white supremacy.
I think the statues need to come down.
I'll tell Donald Trump you said so.
It's I don't think it's a complicated topic, but it is extremely emotional for people. And I've talked to a lot of people that, again, I think maybe just they either don't see or they haven't like really been exposed to the other side of the argument, you know, which is that these are symbols of oppression, right? These are. And I think a lot of people hide behind the idea, and you know, there's actually a decent sort of counter history, and by decent I mean there's like quite a bit of it that's been written about how, you know, and you guys probably heard this argument at different points about how the Civil War wasn't about slavery, right? I mean, you guys have heard these arguments.
Yeah,
you've seen these, right? And then you've
I mean,
seen
there's a memorial to it, like at the Texas Capitol. Like there's like the credo of the Sons of the Confederacy includes some like parenthetical about, it's like it's on some like monument somewhere on the Capitol grounds. That's some parenthetical about how like, oh, and we all know that it wasn't really about slavery.
I think like one of the things that Germany does really well that we kind of suck at is, you know, I have some German friends, and they've told me about how, like, you know, they get taught in excruciating detail about the Nazis, and they get taught about just how many things that Germany did wrong and how they are, you know, they're better now, right? and how they have ideals that are better, obviously, than the Nazis had. But I think in many ways we're a little bit more scared of our history. We're a little bit more insecure about our history.
Well, no one ever
I don't
Reconstruction finished. Like Reconstruction ended before it was finished, right? Like the biggest difference between us and Germany is that like folks actually stuck around in Germany and spent decades and decades getting rid of all the fascists, right? Like Helmut Kohl and other like German leaders had like commissions set up, for trying Nazis for decades, right? I mean, there was an acknowledgement by the victorious allies and by a lot of the folks who were in power in Germany through the 50s and 60s that ending Nazism was like a multi-generational effort, right? It was they were going to have to age out and retire an entire generation of civil servants, basically 2 generations of civil servants. Before they could really be certain that Nazism was gone. And they had to criminalize Nazism, and you're not allowed to like do the stiff arm salute, and you're not allowed to display the swastika. I mean, all sorts of things that we would consider violations of the First Amendment are just the state of affairs in Germany. And right, but there was this like explicit acknowledgement that it was going to take decades and decades and generations. And what did we have? When Lincoln was assassinated, a white supremacist Southern Democratic president took over, and
Andrew Johnson,
and didn't put the full force of the federal government behind Reconstruction, and by Ray Rutherford Hayes in basically a backroom deal agreed to end Reconstruction in order to be selected as president by the House of Representatives. And so what you have is in a short time, less than a generation, you have one white supremacist president and one corrupt president who ends Reconstruction prematurely. And it should be no surprise to anybody that we turned out differently from Germany, right? And the difference between us and Germany isn't like, oh, they laugh at the Nazis, or they have a better education system, or they criminalize the swastika, right? Like the key difference between us and Germany is that Germany was actually reconstructed in a decades-long process.
Well, I think
the South to this day is on Reconstruction. I mean, I think it would be pretty fair to say that the work of Reconstruction has not finished to this day, 150 years after the Civil War.
I think also because we came at, I think people didn't, the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act were not accepted in the South, and they were enforced.
Or by the Supreme Court.
Yeah. But it took 50 years, and we're still not done enforcing the Voting Rights Act. We're still.
I mean, we are.
Well, it's true because of a Supreme
John
Court.
Roberts got rid of it.
Yeah, but I guess my point is that we never made that same strong commitment to ridding ourselves of it, right? And I think to your point, that multi-decade long commitment that it's going to take. And I think, listen, the election of Barack Obama convinced 80% of America we weren't racist anymore anyway. So
I think that's one of Obama's biggest failures. I think Obama has a tremendous legacy of uplift and change in the country, and that the ACA is one of the most astonishing legislative achievements in American history, etc. I think Obama has 2 concrete failures that will tarnish his legacy. And the first of those...
Well, the first is the guy that came after him is Donald Trump. It's going to be hard to live that one down.
Yeah. I mean, that I was getting that. But the first, I think, is the military-industrial complex. And the second of those is that he was able to convince himself, and America was able to convince itself, that we had entered some sort of like post-racial nirvana because people were able to get used to the idea of Barack Obama. And it turns out, fairly convincingly, we now know that... actually...
Wait, so let me... What is your evidence that he was able to convince himself of this?
I mean, I think that a lot of the things that he said through 2016, even after Trump was elected, right, were like, oh, hope isn't lost because somehow white people were able to vote for me. I mean,
I don't know if he... I don't remember him saying that, though. I don't think he had any pretenses that we were living in some post-racial utopia because he was elected. I think he probably believed the opposite. But I agree with you that I think there's a a significant chunk of the population that maybe believed that. I don't know if I would go so far as to say the majority. Maybe not. I just don't know. But I don't think that Obama believed that. Got to stand up for my boy Obama.
Yeah, I mean, but I think Obama very implicitly during that 2008 campaign, did offer himself as someone that could sort of help America absolve those sins, right? I mean, he allowed America to sort of buy into that argument that, hey, if we elect Barack Obama, it'll be proof that racism is now past us.
I mean, how did he allow that?
So the point I was going to make is that Obama failed to understand what a singularly talented and transformational person he was, right? Not that America had gotten over its fear of black people or its fear of progressive politics or whatever, right? I think he had forgotten how singularly transformational he was. And I think sort of a lot of people did.
Dude, that was such a backhanded, that was such a front-handed or backhanded insult or whatever the case may be. He just forgot he was so great. Poor Obama.
No, but my point is that I think he thought that he allowed himself to believe in the fundamental decency of America, and he attributed his success to Americans being able to tap into that fundamental decency. And what he didn't realize was that actually it's basically as bad as it ever was. And that Donald Trump has and that Barack Obama has these uniquely transformational characteristics that allowed America to extraordinarily briefly, basically for a year and a half, to transcend basically its entire past. And I think that letting Democrats take their eye off the ball in that respect for 6 years in a row is ultimately a detriment to our democracy.
I think that may be true about every issue, right? I mean, when you have the president, whatever the party is they assume that a lot of those types of issues that require long-term work are basically handled. And I don't think that was unique to.
We're 7 months into Donald Trump's presidency, and Nazis are marching in the streets and murdering women, right? I mean, we're ultimately agreed that. Not hyperbole. that actually is the case, right?
I mean, so nine months ago, there were people predicting that if Donald Trump is president, you will see Nazis marching in the street and murdering people.
I mean, I predicted that,
and everybody said,
women in particular,
that. And everybody said that was hyperbole.
How else can you interpret the basket of deplorables speech, right? That there is a segment of Donald Trump support that are racist and sexist, whatever ist you want to add to them, and these people are irredeemably deplorable, right? How else can you interpret that speech except to be speaking about Richard Spencer and the Milo Yiannopoulos and all of the folks who were marching in Charlottesville, right? In retrospect, don't you think it is not even generous, but just accurate to go back and say, oh, actually, Hillary Clinton was right?
Yeah, she was right. I mean, she was absolutely right about this, right? And I think it's helpful to sort of – the other thing that I think –
But she had the email.
That's true. She did, and Donald Trump was clever enough to not write emails.
Many sides of this story. Many sides of this story.
The other thing that I think Trump tried to do on Tuesday, which – maybe I don't watch a lot of Fox News, or maybe I should, but the other thing that he tried to do is he tried to sort of muddle these issues, right? He tried to, and that was part of how he made white supremacists, just part of the mainstream, right? Is, of course, he called them some very fine people, but in addition to that, he sort of confused this issue of someone that is a Nazi with someone that maybe doesn't have strong views on whether or not the Confederate monuments should go, or someone that doesn't understand why the Confederate monuments are so offensive. And this actually reminded me of another article that I read where the person was saying that the white supremacists aren't trying to – their recruiting isn't to people that believe their views. Their recruiting is to people that say things like, I'm not a racist, but – and – that's kind of what Trump did here, right? Is he sort of made it, he kind of made it okay, He kind of made it you're a fine person too, Just because you have some of these views, as long as you're not crazy violent, you're a fine person as well. And so what do you guys think about the line of something like that?
I mean, I would guess that it would backfire on him a little bit, right? Like, because if you're just this person who doesn't really have an opinion about Confederate monuments, you know, you might even be sympathetic to having Confederate monuments. You don't want to be lumped in with a group of Nazis, do you? Like, if you're all of a sudden, oh, it's me and the Nazis against everybody else, you might be thinking, well, maybe I should be on the other side. Maybe I don't want to be on the Nazi side.
No, everybody who is going to have an opinion about Nazism already has the opinion that they're going to have about Nazism. Nazism is not some, like, underpulled issue, right? Like, people know what they think about Nazism. I just don't agree.
Hold on a second.
I don't agree with that.
No. What I mean is so, like, let's say you're a person who is sympathetic to this idea of, like, you know, I don't even know, like, history and whatever, right? Like, all the things that Ruchet was trying to say are arguments in favor, right? But let's say you also dislike Nazis, right? Like you were saying, you know, you already have an opinion about Nazis. You think Nazis are bad, okay? If all of a sudden you're lumped together with Nazis, then maybe all of a sudden you're reconsidering your original beliefs or your original sympathies towards these Confederate monuments, because you're thinking, well, you know, I don't want to be lumped together with these Nazis, so, you know, maybe I was wrong about the you know, because you're not going to reconsider your opinions on Nazis, right? You're not going to be like, well, you know, maybe Nazis are good, right? You'd be more likely to reconsider your opinion on the Confederate monuments.
I mean, let's hope that's the case.
And as evidence of what I'm saying is look at all of these institutions that are taking down the Confederate monuments, right? Like, what, you know, you saw Baltimore take it down under the
UT
cover
as well,
and so did UT.
Yeah, UT did as well. I always, I mean, that's one thing that I constantly sort of wonder about is, and I'm an optimist by nature, so I feel like there is a counterforce to Trump and into the neo-Nazis out there. But I also wonder, sometimes I wonder, are they winning? You know what I mean? Because they're sure getting a lot of press. They're sure, you know, causing a ruckus. And then on the other hand, I think, well, you know what? There were 400 of them at a rally. Like, this was the biggest thing they've ever done. There were 400 of them. But at some point, you know what? Adolf Hitler just had a few hundred supporters as well. So I don't know where I come down on it.
So did I tell you guys that I went to a rally?
No. What was the rally?
Tom,
are you a white supremacist?
And no, not a white supremacist. It was definitely protesting white supremacy in the Dallas rally. And there were probably thousands and thousands of people at the Dallas City Hall, and there were like three, I guess.
Seriously?
Nazis. I don't know what they were. Yeah,
that's awesome. That there were only three.
Yeah, maybe I'm underestimating a little bit, but there weren't more than a handful, you know, and they were off to the side.
I think that was true in Boston too. Actually, I think there was some like free speech rally or whatever. Which was supposed to be for, I think it was to include the Nazis as well. But
no. So what happened in Boston was that the alt-right called their rally the free speech rally.
But
so
30 people showed up.
Protesters showed up to protest against the Nazis. The alt-right was like, "Why are you protesting against speech? What do you got against speech?"
Yeah. But there were only like 30 people on the neo-Nazi side.
Yeah, there were hundreds of thousands of people
across the nation. Yeah,
white supremacy and
hundreds of thousands in Boston.
I think
like
so. Yeah,
thousands, but yeah.
Okay, tens of thousands. Maybe I'm exaggerating, but there were a lot of people. There were a lot of people, and there were like 20 Nazis.
Yeah, that's about right.
So that was good. That was good. Good job, Boston.
That's good.
And good job, Dallas, too. You know, for the most part, there was not very much violence at the Boston rally. There was a Donald Trump piñata, which was cool. Yeah. I saw some ACLU legal observers there. They were there to make sure the police weren't searching bags.
Ooh, nice. Good job, ACLU.
So that was cool.
Using that money I gave them. I like that. Yeah, guys, I think this is it continues. You know what I mean? It continues, but I think like people shouldn't be despondent, right? And I think
no, you should be despondent. You should absolutely be despondent.
Yeah, there's a lot to be despondent.
I don't know.
I mean, there's no hopeful message here, right? Like,
no, I think there is. Tom went to a rally, and there were thousands of protesters against Nazism, and there were a handful of Nazis. Like, that's good.
Yeah, but like, this shouldn't be a protest we should be having. There's like no, like, this is a settled issue. Like, it's not like we're still debating whether Nazis are good or bad.
I think sadly we are. I think the president's having that debate.
But that's what's despondent about
I agree.
it.
But I think I think it would be super despondent if people weren't coming out in the extremely large numbers that they are, right? And I guess what I'm trying to say is that don't be so despondent after listening to this episode or after reading the news that you think hope is lost.
I think you should be very despondent.
Don't lose hope.
I think you should be very despondent. I think you should get out on the street, march. I think you should vote. I think you should turn that despondency into action because we cannot afford to continue having a country led by this madman.
I think whether you're despondent or you're optimistic, do all the things Tom just said.
Do you know my theory of the last 70 years?
What'd you say?
You know my theory of the last 70 years?
Tell us.
Sometime in the late 90s, the world just like forgot that World War II happened. I mean, I think you can explain almost all of the history of the last 70 years just with reference to the Great Depression and World War II.
But in the 90s, we forgot?
In the 90s, I think America grew so prosperous through the 80s and early 90s. And I mean, there was a recession in the early 90s, but through most of the 80s and through the mid and late 90s, that by the end of, what Krugman calls the Great Moderation, that people just forgot about the Great Depression and forgot about World War II. I mean, obviously, like, people remember that it occurred, but the influence, right? Like the overhanging,
the historical memory,
right? Like the looming presence of those events in people's mind through the 60s and the 70s and even into the 80s, I think, shaped almost all of world politics in a way that, I mean, I honestly think like the ascendancy of baby boomers, like starting with Bill Clinton and ending hopefully with Donald Trump, right? Like, I think that there is just an entire generation of political and business leaders who just like forgot to care about World War II. That's my like overarching theory of the last 70 years, right? So like think about like the European project. Pop quiz, Tom. What is the number one purpose of the European Union?
To prevent another world war.
Yeah, Ruchit, same question.
To prevent a land war in Europe.
So how many people who voted for Brexit remember that?
Yeah. But wasn't it the older generations that voted
for Brexit?
Right?
It was the old people. It wasn't
boomers.
The young people, though.
Old people. Baby boomers are old people now. Old people run politics, and baby boomers are the first generation that forgot about World War II.
But shouldn't they? But I mean, isn't the obligate, like, you would think they would be the ones that would remember?
No, baby boomers as a generation.
But shouldn't they? If that was true, shouldn't the young people have forgotten even more?
No, I mean, yes, but young people don't vote or influence politics, so it doesn't really matter. Like, it doesn't actually matter what young people think because politics doesn't cater to them. Like, all sorts of things in our life do cater to them, like television and a lot of commercial ventures. But politics does not cater to young people even slightly. And so for young people to remember or not remember the Great Depression is sort of irrelevant. But for baby boomers to forget the Great Depression has been traumatically catastrophic to our politics.
Guys, I think it's been a good show.
Yeah. All right. Before we move on, let me ask you guys a question. Okay. I'm gonna what I want from y'all is, how should we feel about the following individuals, right? And particularly, like, should we feel good? Should we feel bad? And what do we think they should do?
Ooh, I like
in
this.
response to everything.
Can we make
happened,
this a segment,
okay?
Tom?
You know, like, sure. I mean, it's a segment.
No,
right now.
an official segment.
Okay. All right. Well,
Okay.
think of a name, and we can make it in a segment in future.
Tom wants to know what you think about these things. Tweet at HeartlandCast about people. Tweet at HeartlandCast with your opinions.
Ruch, you're muddling the spot. You're muddling the spot. Okay. So the question is twofold. How should we feel about the person, given everything we've talked about in this episode, and what do we think the person should do in response to all these things that we've talked about that have happened? Okay.
I want to piggyback on. Hit me up on the Twitter if you want in the next episode for me to talk more about my theory about how the entire world forgot about World War II. Because it's like much more detailed than the cursory
really
thing I mapped out already.
We can have an entire episode.
Yeah, no, I know this is really thought out. I've been like really obsessed with this for like a year now.
Just create some show notes. We'll do it next episode.
Yeah, dude, let's do it, dude. That could be the next step. We don't even need our Twitter audience to demand it. That's the beauty.
Just don't let it be.
Us.
Just don't let it be like that time we tried to create a term limits episode.
I still think we might do that episode. I scroll past those show notes every time.
Yeah, dude. The term limits episode might happen.
All right. Sidebars?
All right, so here we go. So no, we're not done. We got how should we feel?
Oh my god, this list goes from A to G. There's
Tom,
a
this is pretty long, dude.
Tom,
okay.
Break this up. Tom.
Yes. Okay, so how should we feel about Donald
Trump?
Trump?
How people feel about Lamar Smith. No one's ever heard of Lamar Smith.
No. Why,
no.
dude?
I asked you about Donald Trump.
Dude.
How should we feel about Donald Trump, and what do you think he should do in response? Real quick, go.
Oh, me?
Rooch,
go.
Okay.
Go.
I think we should be ashamed and angry. And I think what should he do about it? He should fire Mike Pence, maybe pick Joe Biden as his new VP, and then he should resign.
Okay, how should we feel about Jared, Ivanka, and the other Trump kids, and what should they do about it?
We shouldn't feel a thing about them. They are completely irrelevant. If there's one thing we know about Jared and Ivanka,
Javanka.
Don't do that,
dude. That's what Steve Bannon calls them.
Don't do it, Javanka. Don't do it. Don't do Javanka. If there's one thing, I honestly, I think that if you have any feelings at all towards any of the Trump children, you should understand that it's all a gigantic grift, and they're all in on it. And you know, I mean, I like what feeling, like, should Ivanka resign? Like, I don't like.
Yeah. What? More importantly, what moral responsibility do they have for what happened?
All of it.
Yeah, all of it, dude. All of it. Ivanka and Jared.
But there's nothing to like feel towards them.
All right. This is a quick.
Hold on.
Quick. This is quick.
AJ wanted to get to sidebars, but Ivanka and Jared.
There are no actual feeling. Like people spend a lot of time being like outraged at like Ivanka or Jared and like, oh, like how, like, no, they're like ridiculous figures, right? They're like absolutely ridiculous. They're like there's no like serious feelings to have towards them. It's just right, like the thing that we should feel about them is that they're like nothing people who do nothing, right? Like their principal business in life is to leak things to Glenn Thrush to distance themselves from the least popular aspects of the Trump presidency, right? Like the only thing these are not like real people who have influence in the government, right? Like
I just love AJ's rant here. Can we please do an episode just about this? And AJ can rant the entire time, and Tom and I can laugh.
Okay, if Jared and Ivanka are real people who have actual influence in the government, can you name one initiative they have that they've successfully pulled off?
I mean,
can you name one initiative that Donald Trump has that he's successfully pulled off?
I mean, Donald Trump actually signed the Muslim ban. Like, they went,
and then it was struck down by the Supreme.
But he went, but a portion of the ACA was struck down by the Supreme Court, right? Like he went from zero text to having drafted and then signed a Muslim ban, and then having amended and signed an amended Muslim ban, right? Like that is like a concrete achievement. It is not a good achievement, and it was not a long-lasting achievement. But he actually went from having nothing to having created something and signed it. And can you name anything that Jared or Ivanka have done in the presidency that reaches the level of accomplishment that you can ascribe to the Muslim ban?
Ivanka serves on multiple women's councils, AJ.
How do you know that the Muslim ban wasn't their idea?
Oh.
Because they distanced themselves from it immediately, right? Because it happened on a Saturday, and it was Shabbos, so they couldn't say anything. And as soon as Shabbos was over, they posted that incredibly tacky photo of them dolled up to go to some gridiron party. And then the next day they were like, "Oh, we didn't know about it because it was Shabbos, but clearly we don't hate Muslims."
Yeah. Okay, all right, let's move on. This is good. Tell me, how should we feel about Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan, and what responsibility do they bear for the events we've discussed in this episode?
Okay,
Rooch?
So I'm more disappointed in Paul Ryan than I am in Javanka, in Donald Trump, in Mitch McConnell. I am just... I think
this is the opposite of what you should think.
Dude.
No, Mitch McConnell is clearly worse and more culpable than Jared and Ivanka.
No, I'm talking about Paul Ryan.
Paul Ryan, but Paul Ryan is also clearly not as bad as Mitch McConnell.
Oh, I don't think so. I think Paul Ryan is much worse. Much worse.
No, Paul Ryan is vacuous and talentless. Mitch McConnell is actually crushingly effective.
Well, here's the thing. I think Paul Ryan has been the worst Speaker of the House by any possible measure. Whether your measure is passing legislation, whether your measure is by being a moral leader, whether your measure is by visiting his district. I mean, it doesn't really even fucking matter, right? He's the worst. And what should he do about it? He should resign. I think my solution for a lot of these things is these people should resign. And if they don't, America should force them to resign by unelecting them.
Okay, AJ, do you agree?
I think Mitch McConnell is worse than Paul Ryan. I think they're both terrible. I think Paul Ryan is vacuous and talentless, and his chief crime that he perpetrated on society is convincing the press to cover him as though he might be good. Mitch McConnell, I think, is much more insidious, right? Mitch McConnell has fundamentally distorted the norms and process of our government, right? I mean, Paul Ryan's...
I don't think so. I think Mitch McConnell does exactly what the Democrats
Mitch McConnell has fundamentally changed our democracy. I will bet you that it will come to be the case that you cannot confirm a Supreme Court justice unless the president and the Senate are held by the same party. And that will be called, by me at least, the Mitch McConnell rule. And that is a new rule that he created in 2016.
2017.
No. 16.
No, I mean, it was in 17 that he eliminated the filibuster, didn't he?
Yeah. No, I'm talking about the Garland blockade, though, right? I mean, I think what you will find is that the comedy of the Senate, this institution, the great deliberative body that Mitch McCain can't get over when he's living inside his own anus, is that I think ultimately you would have to say that Mitch McConnell has done more to destroy that deliberateness and that comedy than maybe any other figure of recent history. And that Paul Ryan sort of vacuous bumbling is entertaining, but for the most part is right, for the most part, he's just being led around by his own caucus, right? He is a dog being wagged by its tail. And so he is a terrible speaker. But on the whole, you don't think that he has this, insidious program for changing the way that American government functions. I think that, Mitch McConnell we're really getting fundamentally changes how America governs itself.
I think we're going a little broader than what I'd hoped. What I want to know is what responsibility do these individuals, Mitch McConnell or Paul Ryan, bear for the events that have transgressed in this episode?
Yeah, I think they're both equally culpable.
Yeah, I would agree.
I mean, Paul Ryan slightly more so, because I think that
I agree.
As long as Paul Ryan holds the House, that that Donald Trump will never be impeached. But I also think that both bodies have all sorts of investigatory powers, and neither Paul Ryan or Mitch McConnell have done anything about it.
Yeah, I think they both they shouldn't kid themselves, right? Everybody knew Donald Trump would someday do something like this, if not this exact same thing. At least from the moment that he sort of quasi-hugged David Duke, the former leader of the KKK,
and then pretended not to know him.
And so, yeah, we should have all known. And honestly, Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell knew, and they do know. And the question is not really when will they start to prioritize, what's right over tax cuts and deregulation. The question is when will voters force them to prioritize what's right over tax cuts and deregulation. Because I don't think either of these guys is going to see the light.
Okay. So the next question is, how should we feel about rank and file members of Congress like Lamar Smith, the representative from Austin? People that most people have never heard of, but are GOP members who support the above list of individuals. How should we feel about them, and what is their moral culpability for the events that have occurred?
So I don't think that there exists in at least like widely known politics. I don't think that there exists a moderate elected Republican in Texas or in the Congress. And so, I'm not like familiar with each of the 50 states, and I'm sure you could find some like moderate Republican in like Minnesota or whatever, and good for you. But like, I really don't think in terms of like consequential bodies in the country, I don't think that you would find a single moderate Republican of any significant influence. And I think that what we should feel towards them is that to a certain extent they're a victim of their own creation, that like the Reagan Revolution has ultimately like been deleterious to the country overall. But I don't think you can just like dismiss them as sheep, right? Like they're not just like little Eichmanns out there being led around by the vacuity of their own banality or whatever. Like I think that these people are like ultimately comparable.
What about people like Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski? Are they not moderate?
No. I mean, I think that they are the most moderate senators, but they're still not moderate, right? I mean, they still caucus with and cause there to be Republican majority.
I mean, we could have a long debate on what is moderate versus what is not. So maybe not. Let's not have that debate. Not an hour and a half into the podcast, anyway.
Well, Ruch, what do you think in terms of rank and file members who empower these above individuals? How do you feel about them, and what sort of responsibility do they bear for our current state of affairs?
So I don't think they're anywhere near as responsible as Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell in terms of how we got here, but I think they bear a tremendous amount of responsibility going forward.
And why is that?
Well, I think because now you can't claim... Now I think there's just no possible way. There's some people that you just can't work with, okay? And by that I mean, like, you can't make deals with neo-Nazis. And you can't make deals with someone that equivocates on neo-Nazis or thinks that there are very many fine people amongst a group of neo-Nazis. You just can't do that. I don't care if they agree with you on 90% of everything else, right? So... I think that's largely what it comes down to at this point. And it's very clear, right? So there's a long history in both Democratic and Republican politics of participating and benefiting from sort of racial dog whistling, right? And, maybe the line is sort of arbitrary, but this goes beyond that.
So I think Richard did a much better job of saying what I was trying to say. And when I compared them to little Eichmanns, I wasn't saying that they're all Nazis, but like precisely what Richard was saying, right? Like there's no level of just like passively going along with whatever the direction of the country seems to be, where, right, like if you just feel like you are following the currents of your party or of your democracy, and you somehow find yourself in the situation of having to confront how strongly should you condemn Nazis in public because there are other considerations at hand, like in that moment in your life, you have lost yourself like morally.
Yeah, AJ just said it better than I said it right
you
there.
You are adrift. Right.
Yeah.
So
yeah, if you're saying,
again, I'm not saying that they're literally Nazis.
Yeah. I think you said it really, really well, to the point where I'm going to repeat it, which is, if you find yourself saying, I really want to speak out against the guy who was embracing, neo-Nazis, but he really does agree with me on tax cuts. he really does agree with me on deregulation. I don't believe in climate change, neither does he. We just have so much in common. Like, that's not a series of thoughts you can have without losing your soul. So I think from this moment forward, everyone that works with Trump, and honestly, this will extend to Democrats, because I think there will be Democrats. Maybe it won't be this month, but in the next 2 or 3 months, if Trump somehow kind of rights his ship a little bit and starts working on infrastructure, and if the Democrats go along with that, because, hey, they agree with infrastructure spending and it'll do a lot.
There's no infrastructure plan, right?
No.
Infrastructure plan is just tax cuts for
No. Hold on a second, AJ. What I'm trying to talk about is that if a situation occurs, I don't know if it's going to occur or not, right? But if there is an infrastructure plan, and let's say it magically has some things that Democrats like about it, right? Their willingness to work with Trump will be perpetuating not just the things that they like about what Trump is proposing, but everything about Trump. There are no halfways with neo-Nazis and their sympathizers.
All right. I know Tom has 2 more questions, but I want to get to Sidebar.
No, one more question, because this is important. Along those same lines, right? Like, what about the congressional staffers working for Paul Ryan, Mitch McConnell, Lamar Smith, the rank and file Republicans? How do you feel about them, and what responsibility do they bear?
I think that's very complicated, because on the one hand, you could say to yourself, oh, I shouldn't work for Paul Ryan. Paul Ryan is so morally vacuous that it would be impossible for me to associate with him. On the other hand, you think to yourself, hold on, I'm sitting here having these doubts about whether I ought to work for Paul Ryan, and I know that if I walk out, he'll just hire someone who has no qualms about, the voting rights of American citizens or whatever, right? Whatever it is. So, ultimately, I think that the congressional staffers who have qualms about the situation that they're in are in a difficult relationship, and I won't tell them what to do or how culpable they are. And the people that have no qualms about the state of affairs should resign from politics.
Rooch?
So I'm going to link this in our Slack, in our show notes as well. But Eliott Cohen, who's a former State Department official and frequent Trump critic, wrote a pretty good piece. I think it was in the Washington Post, but I'm trying to find it. We'll put it in there. But he sort of talked about how...
Is this the...
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, is this the guy who almost got hired until Trump found out that he said mean things about him in the press?
This is the guy that they wanted to hire before, and I don't think he had agreed to serve. This is the guy that Tillerson wanted to be basically the Deputy Secretary of State.
Yeah, he got real close to being hired, and then someone told Trump that he said mean things about him in June or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway,
keep going. Eliott Cohen wrote a good piece about how different people in different positions should be thinking about this exact morality question. And I think the question for the staffers is particularly complicated, because you have a situation where a lot of these people might justifiably believe that they can do some good, and that they can sort of curb the president, or maybe curb Mitch McConnell or Paul Ryan or whoever else from their worst impulses and from any desire that they might have. Now, does that mean that does that mean that they're going to succeed in that? No, but I think if you're a good person and you're working in this government right now, and you're not in a position where your resignation will actually move the ball forward, which listen. A lot of the people we've talked about right now, resignation or just sort of public refusal to work with Trump really would. But frankly, even some senior staffer, I don't think that would do anything. But if you're in a position where you could do some good and you could curb some of the president's worst impulses, anyway, Eliott Cohen talks about how you will be giving up a piece of your soul, but maybe it's worth it for the country.
One other thing to say about this is that, something that H.W. Bush said to Bill Clinton in 1992, and something that Hillary Clinton said of Donald Trump in 2016 is that, Donald Trump actually won an election. Bill Clinton actually won an election. And to a certain extent, often success for America will entail success for Trump. And that there will be circumstances where, when America foils a terrorist plot, Donald Trump foiled that terrorist plot, right? Not directly, but there are going to be circumstances where the success of our country is tied up with the success of our president, and we will have no choice but to occasionally cheer for his success.
Cool.
Yeah, that was good, dude. I'm glad you asked those. I'm glad you asked those questions.
Shall we do show note or should we do sidebars?
I think we should skip sidebars. Are we doing sidebars?
No, let's do sidebar. I have such a good sidebar.
Sidebar?
Okay, my sidebar is the Martin Shkreli jury selection. Harper's posted.
Who's Martin Shkreli for our listeners that don't know him?
Yeah, it's a great question, Richard. So Martin Shkreli is Pharma Bro. He's the guy who had a company that they bought up pharma patents and that would dramatically raise the price of drugs because they knew that it was like a fairly inelastic good. So anyway, he is on trial for fraud because his companies weren't particularly well run. And so this is the jury selection process, not for any sort of like price fixing trial, but specifically for...
I think he deceived investors, or he was accused of for defrauding investors.
So in the jury selection process, there's a period where the judge and the lawyers get to examine potential jurors, and if jurors are unable to render a fair and impartial verdict, if they're biased or have a remuneration linked to the outcome of the lawsuit or whatever the case may be, right? If for some reason they're conflicted, it's appropriate for those people to be struck and not to be allowed to participate in the lawsuit. So anyway, here are some excerpts from the jury selection process where jurors were struck for being unable to, render an impartial decision. So I've got 3 excerpts. I figure we can each read one. Rich, do you want to read the first one?
Oh, hold on a second. I wasn't looking at your notes, AJ.
Okay, I'll read the first one.
Okay.
Are you ready?
I can.
Yeah,
read
Tom, you've got the most judicial voice.
Okay. The court. The purpose of jury selection is to ensure fairness and impartiality in this case. If you think that you could not be fair and impartial, it is your duty to tell me. All right. Juror number 1.
I'll be juror number 1. I'm aware of the defendant, and I hate him.
Then one of the lawyers says, "I'm sorry."
I think he's a greedy little man.
Court. Jurors are obligated to decide the case based only on the evidence. Do you agree, juror number 1?
I don't know if I could. I wouldn't want me on this jury.
The court. Juror number 1 is excused.
Yeah. So, okay, here's another one. I'm going to go through this much more quickly. But
this is funny.
Juror number 25. This is the price gouging, right, of drugs. The court. This case has nothing to do with the drugs. Juror number 25. My kids use those drugs. Court. As I said, the case does not concern anything you might have heard or read about the pricing of certain pharmaceuticals. Juror number 25. It affects my opinion of him.
Okay, can I be juror number 59?
Yeah, okay.
Your Honor, totally. He's guilty, and in no way can I let him slide out of anything because...
Oh, the court. Okay. Is that your attitude towards anyone charged with a crime who has not been proven guilty?
No, it's my attitude toward his entire demeanor, what he has done to people.
The court. All right, we are going to excuse you, sir.
And he disrespected the Wu-Tang Clan.